Taxes. Notice of meeting is being held in accordance with Public Laws 1975, Chapter 231, and adequate notice of meeting has been provided by the notice to the Asbury Park Press 2 over times and posted in the main lobby of the municipal building as well as the municipal website. Roll call, please.
Mayor Portman,
Here.
Alex Schroeder,
Here.
Sam Mancuso,
Here.
Thomas Welsh, Michael Ballard, Art Murphy,
Here.
Juanita Lewis, Lou Demento,
Here.
Christina Bonatakis. Here. Barbara Boas.
Here.
David Cassidy
Here.
and Frederick Stone.
Here. And we have meetings from 6 minutes, we have.
Try that again.
It feels like Wednesday, despite the fact that it's Monday. We have meeting minutes from 6 meetings. So we're going to vote on those en masse, and your vote will count if you were here at each of those. So we can all vote, actually, no, your vote will be allocated so that we are not here all night. So I'll make a motion that we approve the meeting minutes of October 3rd, December 5th, December 19th, January 23rd, February 6th, and March 6th. We have a second.
So moved.
And we'll do a roll call vote on that.
Why don't we,
Mayor
what we might as well just vote by.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Excellent. We've had,
Sean, I was excited.
Okay.
so we have 2 resolutions. We have 20 Northbridge Avenue, Block 2, Lot 401. And that was distributed. Does anybody have any questions on that, Mike? Anything we need to know about that?
What is that?
Northbridge Avenue?
Formerly Red Bank Fire Company?
Yes,
Formerly.
yes.
I have no question.
Okay.
Actually, quite simple.
Anybody have any questions on that one? Anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion, Chairman.
We have a second? I'll do that.
So.
Who's second?
I did.
Mayor Portman,
Yes.
Alex Schroeder,
I say yes to this one, or should I abstain?
You noticed?
were you present?
For which one?
20 Northbridge Avenue?
Oh, yes, okay, yes.
Sam Mancuso,
Yes.
Art Murphy,
Yes.
Lou Demento,
Yes.
Christina Bonatakis,
Yes.
Barbara Boas,
Yes.
David Cassidy
Yes.
and Fred Stone.
Yes.
Our second resolution is a fairly simple one, and this we've done in the past. If we have a conflict, if our engineer has a conflict, then we need another engineer. We need a resolution to have that engineer approved by the board if that should arise. So the resolution is for CME Associates to be our conflict engineer if needed.
Move to accept.
Second.
Call the roll.
Mayor Portman,
Yes.
Alex Schroeder,
Yes.
Sam Mancuso,
Yes.
Art Murphy,
Yes.
Juanita Lewis. Oh, I'm sorry. Lou Demento,
No.
Christina Bonatakis,
Yes.
Barbara Boas.
Yes.
David Cassidy,
Yes.
Fred Stone.
Yes.
Okay, we are going to jump to the public hearing. As we have an applicant here, we will do our ordinance referrals afterwards. So our first public hearing is 2-40 Bridge Avenue, Block 38, lots 13, 14, Block 39, 30, and 31, also known as the Galleria LLC, and the BR zone for an amended approval, seeking relief from a prior condition from a world ago, granted in 1995, requiring additional parking off premises on a separate property. Mr. McKenna, welcome back.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Perhaps one of the reasons that I was named to represent the applicant in this particular case is that I was a member of the board, the planning board at the time of this resolution, but also at earlier resolution. I was actually on the planning board, I think 88. So I'm not personal knowledge because of the application. So how this came about was actually I want to give you a little bit of history.
And bring the mic.
I'm sorry. 1992, the owners of this property came to the planning board and asked for a variance, parking variance, which we then granted. And that was for 183 cars, and they had finding that that was adequate for the entire gallery structure as it existed then and as it exists today. That was in 1992. In 1995, which is the subject of the timeframe this resolution was passed, there were two issues, but the main issue was that a company called First Option, with an occupant gallery, and Dan, I think you.
I do remember this all so well.
They came to Galleria and they wanted to put in 200 employees into the gallery. So we were imposed on that a requirement to they owned the property across the street, which was back then known as the Hanson Davis Camp. Remember that? And they were required to pave it and create a number of parking spaces, over 180 parking spaces across the street with a requirement that 87 of those spaces be held out for the Galleria because of the significant increase in the number of parking spaces that would be required as a result of First Option moving into the property. The owners of the property followed the resolution that was passed by the board. They did the paving across the street, and in 1998, First Option moved out. So from the time the First Option moved out through the present time, which is 27 years, 28 years, they have not needed that parking. So, however, what they were unaware of was that in order to be freed from this obligation, they didn't know until September of 2022 that in order to be relieved from that obligation, they had to come back to the board, because that was our 1995 resolution was if you want to be free from the obligation of being required to park the street, that you have to come back to the planning board and ask for permission to be relieved. So when they discovered that in 2022, they approached our office, we spoke with them, we dug out the resolution from 1995 and made determination that we did have to come to the board and ask for the relief. The family that owns the property in question have operated it for 32 years, and they have made constant observation of the usage of the property and the parking requirements. They have noted and provided information to our traffic expert that they have a surplus of literally 24 hours a day, 7 days. What we asked Mr. McCormick, who testified this evening, to do was to go to the site. We delayed it by several months so that he would go to the site at the busiest time of the year, and he can testify, you'll hear him testify, that is the traditional holiday season coming over to the early January. And also while there were performances at the Jupiter Theater, they had inadequate parking. And we will review with you the counts that he observed at that time. And Mr. Sorrells, George Sorrells is here and prepared to testify to the board about their observations. Their observations included, and Mr. McCormick is going to testify to this also, that people who go to West Elm, people that go to local barbecue, people that go to the marina, all avail themselves of the existing parking spaces at the gallery, as well as some of the spaces for the gallery and not required spaces across the street. In addition to that, the finding of the board in 1992, excuse me, was that 183 spaces were adequate. They now have 203 spaces. So they have 20 more than they were approved for in 1992 at full occupancy of 80,000 square feet until the first option came. The first option came, that's when we, because I was on the board at the time, we required, you were also, we required them to build out this parking across the street, and probably so at that time, it wasn't required. As soon as first option moved out in 1995, the parking problem went away. And that's why all that time, they have not needed that parking across the street. So the request that's being made this evening is for the board to remove that requirement that they have for parking across the street, 87 spaces reserved specifically for the Galleria when they're not using it. So, and haven't used it for years. So that's the nature of our application. Mr. Sorrells is available to answer any questions that the board may have. I thought I might have start out though with Mr. McCormick, who's a traffic expert, and he could address the observations that he made, including the people from other spaces that not only use the Galleria parking lot, but the people that are using the spaces that are built across the street to accommodate the Galleria are being used by other parties. But with the permission, Sorrells are not telling them they've got to move their vehicles. But frequently you can see vehicles from the marina there and from the local smoke barbecue days. But those are also individuals that are using, again, like the Galleria, as well as West Elm and two of the field.
What's going to happen with what's going to happen if this is granted that they now, so we will sever this lot from the Galleria is what you're asking, is that right?
Well, actually, there are separate properties.
I know, but you're asking us to sever the requirement that was in the earlier resolution.
That's exactly.
So what's gonna happen? Is that still owned by the Galleria?
No, it's still owned by the family.
And is there plans to do something else to develop that property other than a parking lot?
Not at this time, but please remember, there is a structure there. In addition to the parking area. And they would like to, since it's not being utilized by them, they would at least like to have the option.
I got the point. The point is that this may no longer be a job in the future.
It may not be the parking area for the Galleria. It may remain a parking lot, it may not, but you know, Michael, the problem is right now, it's basically all impervious surface. So if they want to develop, if somebody else wants to come in and do some development on that property, they may choose to remove some.
I'm just bringing out the point that we really don't know what will happen in the future if, but you're relieving the Galleria of maintaining it.
Correct.
Okay, that's just so simple.
However, part of our intention also is that if in the future we needed to come back, which we don't anticipate ever, and the reason is the Gallery is.
If it's still there.
That you mean the structure.
Parking lot.
But right now,
Right now, they don't need it. I think you made that point, yeah.
And for many years,
Okay.
since 1990. So,
I have a question. So
Yeah, sure.
put on your memory cap on this one. And George, you might need to help here. Is it my imagination or did we at some point approve an office building and a parking garage in the parking lot?
we did back in 92. If you remember, when they came in 95, then what happened was they chose not to build the parking garage. So we, in lieu of them requiring them to build the parking garage, said, you're gonna have to build parking across the street.
Right, but I wasn't here in 92. I got here in 93 and I thought at some point there was an application and maybe we didn't approve it for an office, some structure in the corner of that parking, not down below, the main gallery parking lot with a garage and office space above it.
You're absolutely correct.
Was that an outstanding approved application?
No.
Okay, so that's off the table.
Correct.
Fine, okay, all right.
Yeah,
Keep going.
they decided not to move forward with it. And instead, when they came before the board in 95, the board was willing to grant them the ability to have first option as a tenant. They took basically essentially 2 floors built, but in doing so, they, as the applicant, admitted that they were gonna have this.
Yeah, that I remember.
Influx of employees, so we as a board required them to build 183 parking spaces. I think. 100, so 100 parking spaces across the street, 87 of which were specifically designated for the gallery.
Right.
For first option, and as they indicated, they moved out. Since then, that's the status. So, Michael, to answer your question, you're absolutely correct. It would sever them that what they discovered in the 28 years since this department was voted, is they don't need it. They needed it for.
It's a simple concept, isn't it?
Voted.
Here,
All right, keep going.
May I ask a question now? In the 20 some odd years that this company has not been there and not been using it, the Galleria and the company maintain that property, correct?
Correct.
What took so long to, that's a sidebar.
Yeah.
But if they were to sever this property from the other company, they will still maintain it, correct? And will it be used again, still as a parking lot?
Yes,
So it's just saying that the other people have no rights to this anymore, and it's all ours again. Is that as simple as I can get it? And am I right?
I think what
No, I mean,
perhaps a better way of putting it would be, they would no longer be required to maintain that property, specifically 87 spaces for the gallery. Okay, in other words, they
so if they wanted to open it up as a public parking lot or whatever they wanted to do, that they could do it with the entire parking lot, not excluding the 87 spaces. Up till today,
That whole lot can be now used,
That's-
if they got approval tonight, they can do something else with it. It doesn't mean they won't have to come before a board for whatever it is that they want to do with it.
that's what I
But
was
it's
trying to
no
make.
longer
clear.
tied to the Galleria for spaces.
That's
That's all.
That's what I was trying to make there, that it just is going all back to the gallery. That's fine. It's not a problem.
and
Okay.
Cruz's
Let it go.
100% correct.
Okay.
If they wanted to do anything differently with that property.
Okay,
they gotta go back to the court.
that's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, no, you're 100%.
that's rubber, though.
Mr. Chairman, one
I know, man, something's gotta happen here.
Somebody's on.
small nuance here. As we're talking, it just came to mind. So today that parking lot is basically accessory to the gallery across the street. The point being, it doesn't appear that parking as a principal use on a particular tract is permitted in the zone, is the question that came to my mind as we're having this conversation that I didn't really think of before.
Strictly as a parking lot?
Yeah, if it was gonna be turned into a commercial parking lot for,
Oh, yeah,
and
no, we have to come back.
that could be a zoning board application.
It could be.
Yeah, I mean, odds are whatever else they want to do with it, they're gonna have to come back to the town.
In one
Oh,
way or another.
absolutely. And not only that, to be candid with you, you look at the location, you have to get DEP approvals. You know what I mean? They're not gonna be able to just walk in there and do whatever they want. They're really, you know, they're right on the coastline, so.
Speaking of the coastline, as you know, for the last number of decades, we have endeavored to get an easement from all riverfront property owners as they come before the boards. That act an easement should the day come that we want to build a river walk. If there is not already an easement on this property in the town's favor for that effect, is your client willing to grant such easement if they are given approval this evening? As pretty much everyone else has for all these years.
Yeah, no, we don't.
Great.
I got a question. Is the existing walkway that was put in when we did the River Plaza Bridge? I know the administrator was really involved with that. And the question came about having the river walk and all that. But was an easement taken for that walkway that goes up and around? I think that, I'm not gonna say it was the exchange, but it was a quicker way to do business instead of going through DEP and everything. But so what the question is, was that sidewalk that was put in, which is very nice, by the way, was that donated or, was that an easement that you granted, that you had granted?
Yeah.
It's a pretty, I don't know if you've been there, it's like 6 foot wide, it's lit up like a Christmas tree.
It's fantastic, but if someone, and for someone to get up to street level, absolutely, it's necessary, no doubt about it, which is why we did it when we did it. But if someone just wants to walk along the river, and we may never avail ourselves of the easement in that location, I just want to make sure that we get it.
Yes.
I remember sitting on the board, all the applications or majority of the applications that came across to us on the river. We would take an easement. I wouldn't say take an easement, but that was almost part of the requirement / take an easement.
Yeah.
I mean, you did a lot of that.
Yeah. I will say this, though, that that easement was actually granted to the county in connection with the bridge, because that's a county bridge. So our client did dedicate the easement, but they had to give it to the county.
Which is fine, it's there and it's fantastic. I'm sure that George appreciates the extra hot dog sales, not this George. From all the people in the marina who could quickly hop up there and get a hot dog. So I know that he's happy about that.
And I've been on that line, unfortunately.
All right, you've got an expert
Yes.
who's going to judiciously testify to the facts. Yes.
Gonna raise your right hand? You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Who you are and where your office is.
John McCormick. I'm a principal with Dynamic Traffic. My office is in Lake Como on Main Street. I'm a professional engineer. I've been practicing for 25 years. I've been before this board.
Many times, and I'm happy to stipulate to your qualifications.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, John, you don't mind me calling you that, right?
I do not. I've been called a lot of things.
That's good. So you're retained by the property owners, no matter, to do a study of the site, the usage of the site from a parking standpoint. And also to conduct counts on certain days that are selected, you can condemn the heaviest traffic and parking times of the year, correct?
Correct.
And would you go through with the board, the dates that you did those?
I'll take it from here. I got the hint. So we prepared a parking study stated March 9th. You all probably have a copy or had access to a copy. Mr. Herman got a copy, reviewed it, looked at it. Basically, it's a brief blocking study. We counted every parking spot in the Galleria, and we counted the parked cars in the overflow lot, I'll call it. We counted them by aisle. There's fancy tables, which break down every single spot. all the different days, all the different hours. And I'll get into that. Basically, we wanted to identify the actual parking demand of the Galleria. We wanted to understand what the peak of the peak parking condition is. So we went out there, we know based on industry standards and obviously George's observations over the many years that December is a peak time. We have the shopping in effect, the restaurants are very busy. Yet the offices, everyone is still working early December. So we counted in December, we counted on Saturday, December 10th. We counted on Wednesday, December 21st. And then we counted after the new year. We counted on Thursday, January 5th, and Wednesday, January 11th. We wanted a mix of weekdays and Saturday. We knew that weekday was going to be the peak for this property. Later in the week, we didn't want to pick up Monday, we didn't want to pick up Friday. So we have a series of Wednesdays and Thursdays. But we also wanted to pick Saturday. We wanted to just make sure that we could rule out weekend activity at the site. Because of the mix of uses, because there's a good portion of the uses are office, we knew the Saturday was going to be light. This study bear that out. But however, we picked the Saturday where Two River Theater had a show. Actually had two shows. They had a show in the afternoon, they had a 7 o'clock show. And you can see that when you look at these numbers in that detail, you can see the show and you can see how people use the Galleria parking and then they kind of walk off either for dinner or for the show itself. So simply stated, we took these multiple recordings. The weekday afternoon was obviously the peak of the peak, between 2 and 4 o'clock on all 3 days. Wednesday, December 21st, 4 o'clock it was. We had 161 cars at the Galleria property, and we had 11 at the overflow. It's 172 total. Thursday, January 5th, 3 o'clock was the peak. We had 155 cars at the Galleria, 14 in the overflow. 169 total. And Wednesday, January 11th, 2 o'clock was the peak. 162 cars at the Galleria and 14 in the overflow, 176 total. So you see how consistent it is, right around 170 cars, which is approximately 85% occupied. The Saturday show, as I said, was a lot less. December 10th at 7 o'clock. It peaked later. Obviously, the restaurants were peaking, the theater was in, etc. There was 113 cars at the Galleria, and there were 4 in the overflow. So 117 total, which is less than 60% occupied. Now, as Ed mentioned, and probably everyone is aware, and I'm sure everyone in this room has done it, people park there and either avail themselves of the restaurant and then go to the theater, or simply go right to the theater or right to some of the other restaurants. So we know there's a lot of walkout activity. Obviously, in the main lot, there's adjacent businesses that were mentioned. There's the shops, the antiques, etc. The theater. So we actually, our counters, when they did the hourly counts on those days, the other 45 minutes or so after the count was done, they sat there and they just kind of watched. And they sat up by corner by Siam, and they watched people walk, park and walk off the property, park and walk off the property. So between our observations that George's history with that, we estimate maybe 5 to 10% of the numbers I just read you are people that are walking off. Saturdays, obviously, that number was even higher. That number was significant on Saturday. Similarly, in the overflow lot, there's people that are down there in that lot. Those numbers I gave you, 10, 11, 14. Not all those people are associated with Galleria. When you go over there and you look at where the cars are parked, you can tell a bunch of them are related to the marina. Some of them may or may not be related to those new green buildings that are up on top. It's just when you look at where the people are parked, you're like, well, I wouldn't park there if I was going to Galleria. So I think those people, I think these people, those are walkouts or walk-offs. So we estimate like maybe half of the people down there, which is a couple cars, half dozen cars. So considering all those reductions in the numbers I read to you, our weekday afternoon peak is really about 160 cars parked. That's less than 80% of the spaces that are there, which leaves about 40 spaces available in the Galleria lot. On Saturday, as we know, Saturday is not as severe. It would equate to about 110 cars that need to be parked, which is about 50% Galleria parking. and leaving most like 90 spaces available. So this, these numbers tell me we recorded the peak of the peak and that the overflow lot is absolutely not necessary to accommodate the Galleria's demand. We are confident, I know George is confident that the 203 or some odd spaces at the Galleria is more than sufficient to accommodate his tenants. That's it, pretty simply stated. Those are the numbers, and I can go into any of the specific numbers if you need to.
Got a question. Did you do a count during the farmer's market?
No.
Is the auxiliary lot used during the farmer's market? We have no sense of what the demand during farmer's market time is.
I do not.
We could ask the applicant, what the percentage of parking is weekday versus weekend, because of course, on the farmer's market, any of the office uses are generally not there.
It's not, we did the count during winter when there's no farmer's market, but I'm not saying that's
Right.
the only.
I think
We can ask Mr. Burgos that when he comes up.
I think the farmer's market's only on Sunday. The only time it's on, and maybe 6 months out of the year. I don't even know if it's 6 months out of the year. Only on Sunday.
Mr. Chairman, a couple of questions, if I may. Mr. McCormick, could you speak to the level of occupancy currently of the Galleria in terms of whether any vacant spaces and or can you make any conclusions from the time that you studied similarly?
There are no vacancies, for Mr. Soros has indicated that.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity to review the original computations for that project?
Back from the 90s.
Either the 90s or even before. I'm not sure when that came into being. My question really speaks to what was the original design intent for that massive building? And how does that represent what you see there today in terms of overall? My only concern is the mix of uses. Is there a potential somewhere down the line that a different user would come in, albeit perhaps a permitted use? That could occupy theoretically without having to come back to the board for further consideration. This could be one of those cases where, this activity that we're proposing tonight could hamper future ability to have the flexibility that you may want. Again, it's a business
Yeah,
decision.
I think the mix of uses is relatively similar. We have to really go back and maybe George would have to expand on that. But the way the building is laid out, the way the office space works, the way everything is laid out, I think you're gonna have the same mix. You're gonna have offices in the upper floors, you're gonna have some type of retail and maybe, professional service components on the lower level, first floor. And the restaurant spaces are gonna be what they are, outfitted as restaurant spaces. So I really don't see a major tenant change or mix in that population.
Okay, so here's this crazy history. And Mr. McKenna, Mr. Soros, I bet know where I'm going with this. So before this parking lot became a factor, the applicant had to come back to the planning board anytime a use changed. This is the dumbest thing we ever did. It really was. I mean, they were here like every other week. It was crazy. But I guess there could be, based on what our engineer is saying, perhaps we should discuss if there is any significant, and that would need to be defined, change in use that would trigger X number of spaces one way or another, then perhaps they would have to come back. I'm just throwing that out there as something we did in the past. We did it on a very micro level, which was not a good idea back then, but once this parking lot came into play, we did away with that because they had so many spaces with this extra lot. So there's a little bit of crazy history for it.
And what's gonna tie into that exactly is at the time that we did the 1992 resolution, we put a cap on it of 8,000 square feet. Interestingly enough, the maximum tenant mix as it exists now, and they've been steadily fully rented. The largest tenant is exactly 8,000 square feet, the largest tenant. Everyone under that, including the restaurants, the melting pot, 5,000.
Yep.
Right, so all of the other spaces are well under 8,000 square feet. That's the largest tenant they have. And we spoke earlier this evening we had a quite lengthy meeting at our office. And they have looked at the option of attempting to alter the structure. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, it'd be way too risky. And from a practical standpoint, there is no reason to touch it. It's fully rented all the time. They're getting very adequate rents, more than adequate rents, and the parking's more than. So their position in coming before the board now is, even though they've known about this since September, they did their own study on their own thought process. And then they made a conscious decision after retaining the services of Mr. McCormick and then reporting back to them as far as what his findings were, that it makes no sense to have this requirement as a burden on them and that on that other property. And hence our applications. And again, Mr. Sorless is available to answer.
Ed, do you have any other questions?
No, I think those were the primary ones.
Anyone from the board have any questions for Mr. McCormick? Did anyone from the public have any questions for the engineer, specifically questions for the engineer, not the time for comments or questions otherwise? Okay. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if any of the board members would like to ask Mr. Sorless any questions, we can have him speak in. And right up.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? No. You know, I totally understand what you're doing here. I never have trouble finding parking there. The Sorless family has been, you know, wonderful stewards of this building for decades. And I firmly believe that they would take the best interest of the neighborhood and the town into account when deciding what else will happen here. Personally, a waterfront restaurant down in that parking lot would really be huge. You could put your boat up and have dinner, you know, I'd really be okay with that. I'm just saying. Dock is I'm all for it. So, does anyone from the public have any questions for the applicant or comments regarding the application? You know the drill, Mr. Forrest.
Ben Var, 16 Locust Avenue, speaking only for myself, sitting there. Actually,
Missing something.
yeah, what's that?
Missing something. You should know what to do by now. Raise your right hand.
Okay,
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
But I mean, you've been here a lot.
I am actually one of the few people who use that parking lot. My wife and I come back typically from church on West Front Street to go to the farmer's market on Sundays. And it's as convenient as we live on Locust Avenue to pull in there. And I count usually 4 vehicles in there on a Sunday. Maybe mine would be 5. And I don't know what they're related to. I think some of them are sometimes the farmer's market vendors, actually. It's actually very convenient for us, and I may miss it. So I just wanted to add that, and also that the farmer's market, I think, is has been for a long time a fabulous addition to the town, and adds a great deal. We are there most Sundays, and it's also a great community place. It's not just a place for to buy fresh fruits and vegetables, but it's a great place to see each other. A lot of people from Middletown are there too. But anyway, I just want to thank the service for that. I have no problem personally with the proposal. Unless we have a question from there.
Anyone from the public have any questions or comments regarding the application? That being the case, do we have a motion to close the public portion of the meeting?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Anyone from the board have any other questions or comments? Would anyone like to make a motion?
Make a motion, we move to accept. To approve.
I'll second that. I think relieving the applicant of the requirement to maintain this lot in association with the Galleria is long overdue to be extinguished.
Mayor Portman,
Yes.
Alex Schroeder,
Yes.
Dan Mancuso,
Yes.
Art Murphy,
Yes.
Lou Demento,
Yes.
Christina Bonatakis,
Yes.
Barbara Boas,
Yes.
David Cassidy,
Only because we got such a great history lesson in this room today. I mean, that was quite enjoyable, honestly, but yes.
Fred Stone.
Yes.
Stop and dine.
I got it.
I don't know. If you put a restaurant there, or someone else puts a restaurant there, I'm saying I'm okay with it.
There is a condition on here that they do provide that.
Yeah.
Alex is the mayor.
As we discussed, the condition on that easement, which we'll make sure is in the order.
We're gonna put
In the resolution.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and I want to thank the board for its time and consideration. It's good to see everybody.
See you, Mayor.
Garrett, stay well.
We have two ordinance referrals. First up is ordinance number 2023-12, amending and supplementing chapter 490 of the Planning and Development Regulations relating to EV vehicles and ready parking spaces. Does anyone have any questions about this ordinance?
Mr. Chairman, I'll give you just a 2-second blip on this. Red Bank was actually slightly ahead of the curve some years ago when they adopted an EV ordinance requiring a certain number per parking space. That was a little before the time. Subsequent to that, state of New Jersey adopted statutory reference that became the law, which ultimately superseded anything that the town had. So this ordinance that you have referred to this evening is really largely a compilation of the state statute with a few Red Bank additions added in that make sense. Shauna, did you write this?
Yes, I did. So this pretty much was the template given to each municipality from the state. A lot of the provisions in there were mandatory, so they could not be changed to fit any of Red Bank standards if we've had any. So it was literally just adding Red Bank to the document because a lot of it was mandatory by the state.
Anyone have any questions with that? You have a problem with that? Governor Murphy lives that way. That being said, I'd like to make a motion that we recommend the passage of this ordinance to mayor and council in accordance with the master plan.
What we're doing is that we're telling the council that the ordinance is not in violation of the master plan.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
We have a second.
Second.
Can I do all in favor?
Hmm?
Can we do all in favor? Or we have to-
No.
Mayor Portman,
Yes.
Dan Mancuso,
Yes.
Art Murphy,
Yes.
Lou Demento,
Yes.
Christina Bonatakis,
Yes.
Barbara Boas,
Yes.
David Cassidy,
Yes.
Fred Stone.
Yes.
So now we know why everyone else is still here. Ordinance 2023-13, amending and supplementing chapter 490 of the planning and zoning regulations of the Borough of Red Bank relating to cannabis businesses. Ed or Sean, would you like to give us a rundown on this one?
You want to take this one, Shauna?
Sure.
All right.
So the amendments to this ordinance amends the land use portion of the cannabis conditional use, cannabis business and conditional use sections. It actually adds conditional use standards for cannabis retail businesses, while also removing certain classes from certain zones within the ordinance. It also adds distances because the existing ordinance does not have any distance, and streets based on those distances in which cannabis retailers can be located.
So this essentially clarifies the existing ordinance
Yeah.
And I'm happy to open this up for discussion among the board and then the public. I have to remind everybody that our job when referencing ordinances for the mayor and council is to pretty much, as Mike said, declare whether they are or are not in violation of the master plan. That being said, you're welcome to comment or ask questions about anything related to this ordinance. So anyone who would like to, please go right ahead.
Is it in violation of the master plan?
That's what everyone here gets to vote on, whether or not you think it's in violation of the master plan. That's our job when we get an ordinance from the mayor and council. That's our only job.
So with that being said, what is the footage? What is the footage from a school or a church for cannabis to open? Is that in there?
Yes, that's in there.
What is that?
So, with the exception of the highway business zone, no cannabis retailer shall be located within 1,000 feet of public or private schools, playgrounds, housing facilities, owned by public housing authority, 500 feet from parks, houses of worship, daycares, 100 feet of public or private youth centers, swimming pools, or video arcades, 250, and then there's a 250-foot radius from any retail cannabis store.
One to another.
Are there cannabis applications now already in that the boroughs, I wouldn't say holding, but I know one has come before us at least. I mean, to me, 1,000 feet is a little, it's much. I mean, for what it's worth, everything's on the west side of town. That's the only place they can open anything up. So I don't know if there's a count on cannabis, how many can actually open up and how many can't. But I think that's something to look at, 1,000 feet. That's, it's 200 for a liquor store, for a church. I don't know if it's for a school. But 1,000 feet just kind of limits what can go where and where does it wind up? Well, it all winds up on the west side of town.
So whether I agree.
I'm just,
And those are all valid points. Except it has nothing to do with what we're here to do tonight. We're here to say whether or not this is in compliance with the master plan or not, and the master plan doesn't reference distances. And I agree with you, I don't like where this only allows them to be. I think this is too narrow, but I have yet to figure out how this is in violation with the master plan. So while I don't personally agree with many parts of it, our charge again is whether or not this is in violation of the master plan. So I may end up saying that multiple times, but I don't particularly care for much of the way it's written either.
so, but it is in compliance with the master plan right now, right?
It clarifies the existing ordinance. It is clearly an economic driver for the town, which the master plan references. I don't know of anything in the master plan that says this ordinance by itself violates the master plan.
Yeah, all right. I understand.
That doesn't mean I like it.
No, I understand exactly what you're saying now. I get it.
One thing on the recommendations of the master plan. Under economic development, it tries to remove potential barriers for new businesses. And I'm saying, well, if this is an arbitrary number, 1,000, that seems to be, we're adding a barrier to a new business. And for that reason, I think it may be in violation.
I don't necessarily disagree with you. I want everybody to have an opportunity to talk.
I was just gonna say, I shared the exact same concern in the economic development recommendations.
Turn your mic off, please.
Just remove potential barriers to entrepreneurs, new business types, and experiential retail. I think this is clearly doing that. Not, my concern was that there's no map reference, and it would be very difficult for an entrepreneur to actually parse this and understand which parcels are eligible. I don't know, I think we didn't learn our lesson about directly referencing a map. I think that's a problem with communication. I think that does create a barrier for business people. And I have a problem with that.
Does the master plan address anything about equity? I mean, is there?
Equity.
Equity in relation to economic development or equity in general? And I don't even know the answer to the question.
I don't know what.
And I don't know.
Again, it's following up on what Artie was saying. I have a concern about everything being pushed to one side of town.
I agree with you on that. How that factors in. But what Lou brought up with the economic restriction side of it, I did not think about. That's I think an easier thing to point to in the master plan than equity in general.
Yeah, and I agree with what Linda was saying, the same, Christine, I'm sorry, what Christina was saying, the same thing. I mean, I think when Lou says it stands in the way, whether that's an avenue that just opened up for us or not, I think it takes into a lot of consideration. I mean, the map thing is also something which probably's got nothing to do what we're doing here. The same thing, the limited the license to how many are in the town, but that's got nothing to do with here. But what Lou brings up and what Christina dovetails off of, I agree with that. I agree with that. If you want to look at the master plan and see what kind of tools you have to set that standard.
Two questions.
Sure.
Probably for Sean. Are there any, look, we have these streets defined. Are there any streets that would have qualified under these distances that's not included on this particular list?
As in, like the different breakdown, instead of like an overall like 1,000-foot.
Yeah.
Versus.
Yes.
So before, the existing ordinance doesn't refer, well, I mean, no part of the ordinance actually refers to any schools or anything like that. So this ordinance has a provision for schools, not schools, churches.
Right.
So churches really aren't considered. So because of the church use, the use of a church being in proximity of a church, it excludes certain sections.
Yeah, and I'm fine with some sort of a provision for houses of worship, just to be plain. So let me just ask, like, so Welsh Farms, for instance. That's because it's close to a church. So that's why it's not here. That's within 500 feet of that church. That's why it's not here. The distances that are defined here, 1,000 feet for a school, that conforms with the state, correct?
That is a tricky thing because
Because I want to get to why we chose the distances, why the distances that are defined here, where they came from. And that's kind of what I'm driving at. And I know there's been a talk about 1,000 feet around schools for some time, which I don't have a particular objection to.
So largely, the 1,000-foot was historically a reference to the drug-free school zone mapping that was done probably at the turn of the century, somewhere in 2003 or so. I think it was revised again in maybe 2009.
Even before that, even before 2003, it was within 1,000 feet of a school selling drugs or whatever was. And I think that's one of the things here. And you know what, Dan, maybe I'm getting off track, so stop me if I am. I don't want to waste anybody's time. But it's not it's a legal substance now. 1,000 feet just went out the window.
Yeah.
So, I'm just saying, to me, in my eyes, 200 feet for alcohol from a church or something, I don't, and I'm not saying that that's the number, 500, 1,000 is a little, well, I don't want to go somewhere, I don't want to waste anybody's time, but it's a legal substance now. 1,000 feet to a school is not the case. It's not the case.
It's legal on a state level, but on a federal level, it's still considered an illegal.
We're in the state.
Right.
All right.
There is like a home.
And if you feel as though any restrictions in this ordinance hamper economic opportunity, that could be seen as a violation of the master plan.
One more question then. So we have these these distances defined. All right, we've had people, this thing has been on the books for 1 year and 9 months. And I'm asking this because people relied on that original ordinance. I voted against it. I did. I'm concerned about people that are, can they get variances or is this like firm? Now, anybody who's within the defined distances is now knocked out. They can't get a variance from this for a use, if they fall within those
You
distances.
can
can
get a
always get a
variance for
variance.
anything.
You can apply
If-
for a variance.
You can apply for a variance for anything and a board can grant it.
So the business that's on West Street, for instance, we know there's an application on West Street. They have eloquently testified a couple times. They're around 900 feet from the charter school. They could come here but they're not on the street, right? So
Any existing applications that the board, that the town has that have or have not perhaps been deemed complete does not mean that they have approval.
Right.
Anything about that, I would refer you to the borough attorney. Because we are here to just talk about this resolution and this ordinance and whether or not it complies or is in violation of the master plan. Anything about existing applications, we approved a grow facility, we approved a retail facility here at this board already. Whether or not they are going to end up being in compliance with this ordinance or not is not for us to say at this time because they were approved, or perhaps there are other applications that have been deemed complete from a land use standpoint, but have not perhaps been granted licenses, mercantile licenses by the mayor and council yet. Any questions about that, I would refer you to the borough attorney, because it's not something we should be taking into
I
account
understand. I'm trying
in relation to the ordinance of the master plan.
I'm driving at this economic development question.
It's hard to steady the course. I know what you're saying.
No, it's hard, no, but so my point is, I suppose it's, I have concerns that people put hundreds of thousands of dollars in reliance of an ordinance that should have had these defined from day one. And now we're curtailing economic development potentially in an inequitable manner. And I begged for those limits on day one, but I'm highly uncomfortable with this level of restriction now as I'm considering it. It's a little bit, it feels quite unfair.
You were going to be addressing where these distances came up from, I think, in the initial question.
Yeah, so going back to the 1,000-foot, I think it's important to recall that the purpose of that 1,000-foot originally was the drug-free school zone with the penalty ordinance. It was not a zoning ordinance. Right. So it basically said if you were caught with a certain amount of drugs within a school zone, penalty that you were hit with upon conviction was significantly more severe than outside. So it was never intended to be a land use. Similarly, that's a little better. We found the echo. So, but that was everyone's frame of reference when we first started, right? And part of this, one of the challenges you're going to run into is this has been debated at length at council. There's strong arguments on both sides of this equation. You're never going to make everyone happy. I think that's the quandary we have, right? And it's not unique to the borough of Red Bank. Other towns are wrestling with these issues as well. Unfortunately, I think just the way it came to pass through the state, there wasn't maybe enough guidance in the very beginning to really allow towns to leverage the state's understanding and all of the CREAM Act and all that stuff. So towns were largely forced to, hey, you got 6 months to get this out. As we know, it takes time, right, to get these things out and right. And I think it changed over a period of the last, to your point, a year and a half. We're learning from other towns. We're learning from as these applications come in. There are things that towns weren't thinking about at the time. It all sounded good until you start looking at the ramifications of 1,000 feet. You heard some folks representing the school saying, "Wait a minute, time out. Why is this not 1,000 feet? We don't understand." You could say economic development, but you could also say, protect our children. We heard that at council on numerous occasions. We want to protect our children. So there's sort of this balancing act with this ordinance and these distances. So to answer the question, it's my opinion that the 1,000 feet originally came from that drug-free school zone. That was everybody's sort of recollection that just seemed to be, right? So I would speculate, I guess, that many towns at first flush used that 1,000 feet basically as in deference to the 1,000-foot drug-free school zone that everyone knew about, right? That was their level of comfort. So there wasn't anything necessarily, I think there's some federal, that talks about some things in the federal.
It does, but I just want to add that when we first came up with this ordinance, and referred to, the state and federal laws when it comes to, schools and playgrounds. The CRC then sent out, they amended their stanza on that and said that, well, the cannabis establishment are not considered, I guess, the illegal use. So it can be closed. So when we first came up with the standard, this ordinance, the CRC never put out any type of provision for a drug-free zone. And then they went back and amended it to say, well, drug-free cannabis retailers shouldn't be considered a part of the drug-free zone, included in a drug-free zone. So now we're just amending to catch
So
up.
one of all the actions that the state took with legal cannabis was they decontrolled, if that's the right word. It was formerly a controlled dangerous substance, which kind of gave it the 1,000-foot thing under the drug-free school zone criteria. Now it's illegal. It is a legal, not illegal. It is a legal substance in the eyes of New Jersey.
I think like the state puts out a boilerplate, like, okay, you know, this is creeping up on us really quick. We got to set some kind of guidelines or rules. So what do? And not, you know, I get it. 1,000 feet from a school. That's what it's been. Let's make it that. Without, like, look at the borough of Red Bank, what we comprise, or we're made up of, you know, the 1.7 square miles, whatever it is. That kind of limits a lot of things when you say 1,000 feet from school. I like what Lou said. I mean, I think it's not opening up to people to open businesses.
And part of the challenge with feet, the reason that the majority of our ordinances don't have anything to do with the feet from anything else and have zones. Because if someone creates a playground, it's not here now, and it's within X number of feet of a then permitted cannabis use, it now makes that use non-conforming, which places a burden on that perfectly legal and approved application and business that had opened at a time when it was all of those things. And now, because someone opened a playground, a school, a house of worship, or anything else, which could happen, you know, that's why ordinances are based on zones, which are far better defined than 250 feet from the big oak tree at the corner, which is, you know, if you've ever read any old property descriptions, that's what they say. So, you know, there are without a doubt challenges associated with it. There's a gentleman in the back who's dying to ask a question. So, sir, if you come up and tell us who you are and be sworn, we are happy to take public comment and questions at this time. Thank you. Keeping in mind that our entire charge that's in there is how this associates with the master plan.
Want to raise your right hand? You swear to tell the truth, all the truth, nothing but the truth.
I do.
Tell us who you are.
Andy Zeitlin, 829 Orchard Road. So I am also a co-owner and founder of Canopy Crossroad, the applicant for 9 West Street. So we actually have signed that lease, so we are occupants of that property. With regard to the master plan, which I actually looked at, can't say I read the entire document, but I did do a number of word searches, and obviously one of them was cannabis. It's mentioned twice. It's certainly not mentioned with regard to legal cannabis. It was, I think it was anticipated prior to a lot of the events that we're talking about today. With regard to hardship on entrepreneurs, you're looking at that. We filed prior to the original ordinance, prior to the changes. We filed under the original ordinance with an existing map. And there's a tremendous hardship put on us now that has been changed twice. There was a proposed amendment that included West Street, and then it was taken out in the current version, and it was actually requalified in the original ordinance that was based upon a map. So if you look at the original ordinance, there's a map in there that actually I thought was very good, and I wonder, you know, at some point in the future, you might want to consider just using that map with the caps. And you basically have achieved your goal. You're keeping it zoned away from significant places of children or schools, of parks, of religious establishments. And at the same time, doing it equitably throughout the entire town. That's the point of a map. It gives you a nice visual of where it is accepted and where it is not. Now, as it turns out, that map was off by about 10% from what was an engineering map. And so as a result, some of the areas that are actually 1,000 feet are not covered by that map. So let's go back to the 1,000-foot question that I think you just very, very accurately covered. It is based upon state law that is for illegal drugs. When the state passed PREMA, they removed cannabis, legal cannabis, from the illegal drug-free zone map.
I just have to stop you a second. I mean, this has nothing to do with what we're facing here today.
No, I'm sorry, let me bring it back.
I mean, now you're saying all the defects in the ordinance.
Yeah, bring it back to the master plan.
Right, and we only want to hear about the master plan. Don't tell us about the other map were better or this or that. That's meaningless.
No, I understand. I'm trying to tell.
Let me point out two other things while we're on that subject. One is, do you have an application that actually has been filed?
Yes.
And what is the status of that?
With the state?
No, with
the town, we have a completeness review and we're going in front of the planning board May 1st.
Okay, so that's an issue that you're going to discuss with your attorney as to filing and the effect of filing, no matter what ordinance goes through.
Right.
All right. And then the other issue is about what happens. A good example is that somebody opens up a church or something and makes the existing approved legal shop now as not conforming or illegal. It's not an illegal use. It now becomes a legal non-conforming use. I mean, people had all kinds of things that changed, but they had a right to continue what they were doing. So it doesn't take them out.
Makes them more difficult. It makes it more difficult for them if they wanted to make a change.
Right here, and I think we've heard it here a number of times as to whether or not there's actually something in this ordinance that is counter to the master plan, or there isn't, and that's what we should be looking at.
So.
I don't know, I never have.
30 seconds.
Things more confused.
Wrap up your story.
Okay, so going back to how this is a hardship, it's very confusing, this ordinance.
Let's talk about hardship. That's something to do with zone. We're talking about, is there conflict
with the master plan?
No, if you refer to the language of the master plan saying that the master plan would like to encourage entrepreneurs to develop areas of this town that are underdeveloped, that's a conflict. And the conflict is that this ordinance is very confusing. It's internally inconsistent. There are zones, for example, and I'll just give one example and then I will stop. The Newman Springs Road is included on the new ordinance. However, Newman Springs Road, all those properties are adjacent to, directly attached to Count Basie Park. So if you're talking about trying to remove and trying to make it clear to entrepreneurs where they could place these things, it seems a little inconsistent that you would exempt that one area that actually is right next to the biggest congregation of sub 21-year-olds in the entire town.
So you're saying
you know what you've done exactly again, you've attacked the ordinance rather than the master.
What I'm hearing from you is that you feel that the ordinance hampers economic development, which is therefore counter to the master plan.
Yes, and it's confusing. Yeah.
Yeah, he needs to tell the story to realize what's going on. He's one of the gentlemen here who are being, hampered, to open his business. I mean, I'm thinking lose route.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Anyone else in the public have any comments or questions? Okay,
Once I warn you again,
What else?
that we're looking at whether it's really inconsistent to take something very broad and say that it hampers some people who want to put their cannabis use here and it's not permitted, well, then it does hamper. But does that mean then it can go anywhere? That's not the work. I think one of the consistent things here, an interesting question, is that usually we deal with zones. So we can control what things take place in the zone, and we have many zones here. But here we got an ordinance that allows it not described by zones. There's no map, right?
There is no map, and also we have to remember that this isn't, the retailer component of this is a conditional use, and there has to be conditions under which the use has to fit under. It's not as though cannabis retailers are permitted as of right. If it was permitted as of right and we had said, here are these specific sections, when it's a conditional, is permitted as a conditional use, is saying, do you meet all of these standards? There are a lot of, and then if it doesn't, then it goes to the zoning board. And this is for a lot of uses such as churches, which has conditions to it. It has to meet such and such lot size, it has to meet such and such.
Gasoline stations traditionally for decades always required that they be a certain amount of feet away from one another gas station, and two from certain uses because they were dangerous. And that applies to the use anywhere in the borough, and these are conditions. All of these things, of course, can be overcome with variances as.
So Mike, an ordinance that is narrow or limited in scope as to where a use could operate, could that be considered a detriment or to hamper economic development?
Of course it does, but any ordinance would. I mean, because, I mean, when if any ordinance that controls a particular type of activity is hampering economic development, because maybe in another section of town, you want to put in a use and that use isn't permitted in that commercial zone for whatever reason. It's hampering the development of the person who wants to put that use in that spot. So, I mean, that's common with any ordinance.
When you're dealing
This
with
is not
zones,
an
though.
easy question.
Well,
And then remember one more thing, that no matter what we do, it can be overcome because we don't legislate by a supermajority of the vote of the council.
Mike, okay, this non-conforming use question. So this gentleman gets an approval on West Street, let's just pretend. Someone decides to come in and take the old coin shop that's been empty and say, I really don't like cannabis businesses. I want to open a storefront church, literally, so I can knock him out of business. He'd have to close shop?
No.
Okay, I'm checking. Fine.
He becomes a
Comes grandfathered in.
non-conforming use, it's like
Fine, so it's legal non-conforming use. He's
I
not
have a
shop.
four-family house and a two-family zone. I'm not out of business, I can still have a.
I'm checking here. There was something that was said that triggered something. I mean, that's how I thought it went. I was a little.
That's the way.
It does become non-conforming, though, that if
Right.
it was conforming and that property owner wanted to make some kind of change down the road, expand,
Right.
or anything that perhaps could require, let's say, a C variance that might be more easily gotten.
Right.
That wouldn't be the case anymore. Anything they wanted to do would become more difficult because they are now a non-conforming use.
But anything that you restrict, any kind of use is.
No, I understand.
Economic development.
No, I totally understand. I totally understand.
I'm that's what it's there, because I don't.
No, I understand what you're saying to me.
I just want to circle back to the distances, because I understand where the 1,000-foot came. I mean, it's clear why that's in there. Where did these other numbers come from?
Some are a reference. There were 500 feet was also part of the drug-free school zone. It was for the housing facilities, I believe, were 500 feet. The others were developed through the code committee in town. There's really I don't think there's any linkage to any specific document that outlines where these come from. So, but the two that I'm aware of are the 1,000 feet and the 500 feet. Everything else was a creation of this ordinance.
And it was also referenced from other municipalities too. So it was researched with other municipalities such as Bayonne, Jersey City, Plainfield. I can't remember the others, but they were we all compared it and kind of found that there was a trend amongst the type of uses that they wanted to form businesses from.
Did they compare them with any municipalities similar in size? Well, you just came off with a litany of big cities in mind.
Well, some big perhaps for population, but I don't know how many cities there are in New Jersey. Of the 525 municipalities, they're under 2 square miles. So you've got to take some reference from somewhere.
Right, but there must be some.
There might not be. I mean, there's some, the overwhelming majority of towns do not have cannabis use in New Jersey. So I don't know that there's a broad look at this yet. It's
Although
still early.
supposedly is the same size as Spring.
I don't know about that.
I don't know about that yet.
I just read that and I looked it up because somebody told me
I read the world was flat recently.
Yeah, well, no, they tend to be.
There's Dan.
Points
It's Dan.
per mile.
Does anyone else from the board have any questions or comments? We'll go.
One more question for clarification. This applicant that was just discussing here, he could still come, this gets passed. It's now 1,000 feet. He can still come here with his application, ask for variance, correct?
One thing he could do if he's in violation, sure.
Yes, keep in mind that we're sending, our function here is to send this back to the mayor and council that it is or is not in accordance with the master plan. They've only done a first reading on this.
Yeah.
So there's obviously more opportunity for the public to speak to the mayor and council about this ordinance before it's passed.
Can we send it back with recommendations?
Yes, you can.
If you've got something specific, yes.
I believe this is something they should be looking into. So.
Does anyone else in the public have any questions or comments? No, you're done. No, I mean, if you've got something new specifically related to how this impacts the master plan, you are welcome to come up and speak again. I don't want to discourage you other than to repeat yourself or get us off topic in relation to the master plan, because that really is our charge. Anything else, you should go to the council meeting. You are welcome to come up here and say something else if you want. I don't want anyone to ever think that I don't give people an opportunity to speak.
I'm Andy Zeitlin, 829 Orchard Road. I'm just trying to be cooperative. I really am. We have a legal lane. We're going to do that, obviously. I would suggest that you look at Maplewood, actually. Maplewood is less than 2 square miles. It has twice the population, actually, of Red Bank. And they have a very good cannabis law. I actually had a recommendation from the mayor for a store in Maplewood, so I can tell you a lot about it. But I better not say anything more. If you have any questions,
That's a very good idea to tell council, but we can't do it.
I understand. If you have any questions about cannabis law, I've been spending many years on this, so I'm just a resource.
Thank you.
I would also like to clarify my point earlier. I think we were all talking about the economic development portion of the master plan. And yes, this would inhibit economic development, though, to your point, Michael, that could be any use, right? Any zoning could do that. What I was referring to specifically was the lack of clarity in this ordinance.
There you go.
Does not streamline approval process overall and remove potential barriers to entrepreneurs. In fact, this is inhibiting their ability to begin in this process.
Does that make it not within the purview of the master plan
That
because
is-
it's not clear?
I think so.
Sure it
Also,
does.
Another,
Okay.
another
Sure it does.
that I would add to that, even.
The board makes these decisions.
I consider it to be, for one thing, not only do we not have a map that's going to help people understand what this actually means for their potential business. Well, we do have these radiuses, right, that are in effect. However, there's the only item that we mention about how those are measured are that it's what from, Sean, I believe it's from the property line. That's the only line. I believe that you provided us with presentation from Passaic County about cannabis.
That was where,
It was, you shared with us, it was a conference.
oh, yes, it was a seminar that was done, yes.
I mean, and I understand that a lot of places are struggling with some of these things, right? But I specifically recalled this. They, in their checklist, they recommended if you're going to include distances, you should explain exactly how to measure those distances. Walking legally from door to door, some other measurement from lot line of the other use to the nearest portion of the building containing the cannabis business as the crow flies. We're saying from the lot line, but I don't think that is specific enough. I think that's not clear to a business person. And it bothers me that this ordinance isn't specifying that. I feel like the lack of clarity is an impediment to the process itself. And I feel like that's against what the master plan, the spirit of that economic development portion of the master plan.
Well, I just want to clarify also that the current ordinance doesn't reference any map also.
I'm aware, but we're not,
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the past, right?
No,
And I also
I just
not meant to arbitrate the distances. I understand what is our purview and what isn't.
Right.
And I get it. We needed to make change. We still do. However, I don't know that this gets us there. And I think it is creating more of a problem for business owners. I honestly don't know how you would understand where we are permitting these uses from the language here. It would be incredibly difficult.
Just want to comment on that too. It's 1,000 feet from the lot line. So you have some of these organizations, the church, for instance, that have big lots. So you need 1,000 feet from here, you need 1,000 feet from here, you need millions of 1,000 feet. It's so confusing.
It sounded a little like Bernie Sanders there. I agree with you. Keep in mind, from a planning and zoning standpoint, you've got to use property lines. You can't use buildings. You think it's difficult now to figure out where you can be. Then you'd have to hire a surveyor
No,
to figure out where the church sits on the church's property to measure the distance. I hate the whole thing of measuring distance.
no, that's what I'm saying.
We have
We
zones,
should have zones.
and we
We're allowed
need
to-
a cannabis overlay.
This whole distance is done based on this idea for the drug-free school.
Yes.
And we shouldn't use that anymore. It's too arbitrary.
I don't
And we
disagree.
come up with all these other numbers and you've been measuring numbers ad infinitum. I mean, it's crazy.
All of this wonderful information being said, does someone want to make a motion regarding this ordinance and its application to the master plan? Its relevance, whether or not it
Let's
is,
frame it. If we're going to say that,
well, I want to get a motion.
we're going to say that the present ordinance is contrary to the master plan, that's what you've got to say. And you got to say because it is inconsistent and it is detrimental to economic development, which is called for in the master plan. I don't know if I could say it again. Is that good?
Yeah.
I'll move that.
You'll move that?
Yeah.
Well, I remember what I said.
Well, we recorded it.
Oh.
Is there a second to Lou's motion to declare this ordinance inconsistent with the master plan for the reasons that Mike mentioned, not limited to economic development?
The master.
And whatever else he said.
Second.
We have a second from Christina. Let's get a vote
Just to be clear.
on the mic.
To be clear, you're saying that we're voting on, we're finding the ordinance to be inconsistent with the master plan?
That's correct.
The yes vote would say, I agree, it is inconsistent with the master. plan.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
You can, there are some people maybe feel that is consistent.
Yeah, if you feel that it's consistent with the master plan, you could go with that.
Ordinance, but it's consistent. It's not inconsistent.
So who? Motion.
Lou, Christina seconded it. So just so that we're clear, a no vote
Yeah.
is that you think the ordinance is consistent with the master plan, and the yes vote is you think it is inconsistent for the reasons we mentioned.
So yes is we're turning it down.
Yes. Go.
All right. Oh, Mayor Portman,
Yes.
Dan Mancuso,
Yes.
Art Murphy,
Yes.
Lou Demento,
Yes.
Christina Bonatakis,
Yes.
Barbara Wallace,
Yes.
David Cassidy,
Lou, you swung me. Giving you my credit, yes.
and Fred Stone.
Yes.
That being said, if anyone on the board has any recommendations that they would also like to include to the mayor and council regarding this ordinance, I would recommend you to now speak to that so that we can include that.
I'll tell you, I mean, we have applicants that were relying on this economic development and consistent with the master plan that are within 1,000 feet. We're not talking about putting dispensaries next to a school. I think we have an applicant that's about 900 feet. I think that we should be looking at this with considerations for the applications that are currently on the table so that we're not creating distances that are arbitrary. There is no difference between 900 and 1,000 feet. And for anyone to argue otherwise, it's nonsense. And the council should be looking at those existing applications on those sites and trying to find a way to not pull the rug out from under those people who have invested so much money in our town. They shouldn't be pulling the rug out from under those people. There is a happy medium. We don't have to go to from one extreme to the other. There's something in the middle.
But look into the future.
Oh,
So what if you take the 1,000 feet away, or what should it?
Yes, because the rug they may still be on the rug. That's a legal question. And Mike hit it right on the head. We've got to think long-term, long after we're gone, because those people may very well be on the rug just fine for legal reasons. We need to think about this from a broader view. And in my thought also is that the zones, the areas of town that we're putting in are incredibly restrictive in my mind. And
I agree.
do lend themselves to being less than equitable based on the population.
And what would a cannabis overlay look like when you're?
It would, in my mind, a cannabis overlay would look like a train station overlay or the CCD2 zone, or it would look like a regular zone on a zoning map where it was incredibly clear where someone could open a business or place a land use.
Yep.
And anything with circles or other non-rectangular shapes make it difficult for people to figure that out. When you look at our zone, it is incredibly obvious where you can or can't place a use, whether it's through an overlay or a specific zone. Zones are drawn through, right through streets that many years ago made no sense, that had to be changed over time, which is why we need to take a long view of this. But I think that the current thinking of where the uses is too restrictive. I understand why they are. I think there were a great many voices that have opinions about where cannabis should or shouldn't be allowed. And I think more of that emotion was taken into account than practicality.
What you said.
Dan, I'm just curious, do you imagine, I'm just trying to envision that and include as note that an overlay could potentially, like zones are on occasion, be discontinuous as well?
Absolutely discontinuous. I'm not suggesting the train station overlay as an example, is a bad example. That, as far as I recall, is contiguous. I don't think, we jump 5 or 6 lots and continue it. I could be wrong. But yes, a cannabis overlay could be in 20 different places. If it needs to be that way. I think what it currently exists is too restrictive. And this is a legal the state of New Jersey has made this legal. And, you know, and my kids grew up in this town, my kid went to school in this town, we go to church in this town, so, you know, anyone who wants to attack me because they think I don't have the children's best interest in heart, can call me, I'll happily talk to you about it anytime and how ridiculous you are. But, you know, I'm far more worried about plopping a liquor store in a residential neighborhood than I am a cannabis dispensary. And all the commentary, you know, over the last year about traffic and lines and people, drive by the one in Eatontown on Route 35 now any day. There's no one left standing in front anymore.
Listen.
I went by 3 or 4 times in the last couple of days. There's rarely anyone standing in front. The line is not around the building like it used to be. And I think these uses are going to level off. And I've said this a few times already. It's like the frozen yogurt thing. There were 5 frozen yogurt places in Redmond with all the rage. Now I don't think there are any. And right, there's none. Shauna's upset about that. She likes frozen yogurt.
Come back.
So, you know, I think it's gonna level off over time where there might be 1 or 2 retail uses, and 2, I think, is gonna be a lot. I just don't, I think it's not gonna be as big a deal as people think, but as we think about this and if we see it again, we need to take that long view in any kind of zoning that happens in town. So put that in a note.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
The thing we recommend,
Use your microphone.
are you recommending that rather than the circles, the distances, we have an overlay which specifies specifically on the red bank map where they could be located?
Yes, just like we do for every other land use in town. I think it should be a zoning map, as Christina said, that's easy for someone to figure out. Now, listen, I don't think it's all that hard to figure 1,000 feet from there, because everybody's got to hire an engineer to do anything. And I love maps. You don't need to be an engineer to figure that 1,000-foot thing out, but let's say you need one, because you probably do. It's easy to figure out, but it doesn't make it practical. It doesn't make it practical to drive down a neighborhood and say, I'm looking at this map, and this is where the BR1 zone starts and ends. I think that's very easy for people to see. And I think everything we do should be easy enough to not hamper economic development. Or proper land use and controls for the residents of Red Bank. I mean, there's both sides of this.
How about the limits on the number?
That's not us. That's not us.
It's a different
Run
ordinance.
for
Son, even if we have an overlay, you still gotta deal with how far are you gonna be from a school? How far within the overlay are you gonna be from a church? Maybe not 1,000 feet, maybe it's 721 feet. I don't know.
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, maybe it's,
And you're still faced with that problem.
we are, but, well, we're not, the council is, and then we can discuss it at the time, but I still think those distances should be taken into consideration when hard lines are drawn on a map like our zones are today.
It's a process. If they ignore us and go ahead, that's the end of it, right?
Yeah, the supermajority of the mayor and council does not need us to do this.
Oh, a supermajority,
Yes,
okay. But if they come up with a new, if they modify it, it has to come to us again.
Yes.
yes, and whether we did what we did today or not, and at the second reading, there was public outcry and they made another change, they would have come back again. Was there anything else on the agenda? I told my wife we'd have 7:15, I swear to God.
Dan, thanks for coming in.
Yeah. You gotta be sworn, come on, you know.
Sam Scomey, 25 Cedar Street.
Gotta go slower than me. I'm not that fast as you are. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Absolutely.
Good.
Tonight was a really cool discussion, and I really like to see you guys building upon each other's ideas. And like David, you mentioned earlier, it was a really insight about business development. My question is, or actually, I should thank you first, Mr. Mancuso, by letting us do the Zoom meetings, right? But if you're not watching it live, it's it, that's all. And as we just showed earlier in this meeting, you haven't published minutes for many, many meetings. So my proposal is, just like what the council does, to post the meetings on the town website, or I mean, on the town's Facebook is really doing it now. So people can look and watch this meeting. Because I think you guys made a lot of good points, but if you don't watch it on my Facebook account, it's mute.
Well, first of all, everyone should watch it on your Facebook account.
I appreciate that.
But beyond that, Shauna will respond.
So right now I am working with our new webmaster to have it embedded on the website. Because we did it before and it was based off of through the Zoom cloud. Now, we realized that we didn't buy enough memory for it to be, so all the meetings that I was posting from earlier on this year were deleted. So now I'm finding a way how to embed it into the website.
Well, if you like your old meetings, I have them.
I still have them too, yeah.
Hard drives, probably the last 15 years of the council and everything I think. But I appreciate that, because right now I'll stream it and make sure it's out there, because you guys really, and this is an example which unfortunately doesn't always happen in a council, where you have a really good mature meeting, no eye rolling, no immature acts. You guys are able to come up with an idea, come up with a solution, come up with ideas to the council, and have an adult discussion, and I appreciate it. I love the insight. Thank you.
We're happy to do it. Now that we're on camera, I can't eye roll as much as I used to. And believe me, the last thing I want is all of our old meetings published anywhere. I mean, since we've been recording them, it's fine, but years ago, no. And I'm glad they're gone and they don't exist.
There was a great one in 1998.
Yeah, in 1998, we were here till 1:30 in the morning. It was fantastic. Anyone else have any comments or questions? Anyone from the board want to include anything else in the minutes of the meeting for the mayor and council? We have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all for coming tonight. I really do love it when people come in.